I'm Dr. Lori Marvis, and I'd like to welcome back my friend, Dr. Jud Brewer. How are you today?
I'm good.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you, I reached out to you just I think last night because you sent out an email to your email list on this hidden superpower. And let me tell you, that tagline really got my interest, and it was an amazing article. So, can you tell me a little bit about what this hidden superpower is that we all have?
Did it pique your curiosity by chance?
Yes, it did. Way too much, actually. Then I dove down even deeper. I followed a rabbit hole. Go ahead, please tell us about curiosity.
Yes, that is the superpower. We've been really studying how habits form. In my lab for years, I've been clinically trying to figure out simple ways to help people change habits. And actually, a lot of this has been converging on curiosity itself, from ancient Buddhist psychological teachings to modern day neuroscience. So, where do you want to start?
Well, there's a lot to it, but why don't we just define what curiosity is? Because I think maybe just a plain explanation, I think people mostly understand, but maybe just maybe a scientific explanation of what that is first.
If I could give you a good scientific explanation, that's a good question. That's one of the things
I
that
can look it up on
scientists,
Wikipedia.
yeah, the scientists don't all agree on it,
Oh,
which is interesting. But I think of it as, basically a drive to learn something. So you could
okay.
think of it that way. It's simple.
Because that explains in your article, because you had your email article, and then there was a link to another article on drjudd.com. Guys, got to go sign it, pick up, go click on that and sign up for the email list. They're all super helpful articles. And you mentioned pleasant and unpleasant curiosity. What
Mhm.
do you mean by that?
Yeah, let's get into that. So we all kind of have a sense for what curiosity is. And I'd been teaching this clinically for a couple of years. So this last summer, I really dove into the scientific research to see what there was. And it was fascinating. It was really fascinating.
Were you
Turns,
curious?
I was super curious. It turns out that there are two main types of curiosity. And there was a guy, Jordan Littman, who wrote about 15 years ago an article that really brought together a lot of the literature that was really the curiosity literature that was trying to figure itself out, so to speak. And he put it in very simple, plain language terms that I think that work very well. One is called D, or deprivation curiosity, and the other is called I, or interest curiosity. So with deprivation curiosity, we can start with that one. That's pretty straightforward. It's basically if we don't know the answer to something, or we have, you know, we let's say you watch a movie or something and you say, oh, I know that actress looks really familiar. And then there's this drive that says, go Google that and find the answer. So it's really based on specific information that we don't have. So we're deprived of a piece of information. Once we get that piece of information, then we feel better. And that deprivation has been relieved, so to speak. We're no longer deprived. And so that curiosity is satisfied. I think of this as destination curiosity. So, once we get to the destination, the journey is over, the curiosity has been satisfied. And I'll come back to what it feels like in a minute, but let's now talk about interest curiosity. So interest curiosity, instead of the destination, is more the journey. So we might be driving along and just exploring things along the way. So we don't have a specific uh, concrete goal in mind. It might just be, oh, why is this sky blue? And it's not like there's some, there is an answer to that, but we're just generally interested. Like, oh yeah, when I look up at the sky, it's blue. Why is it blue? Well, it turns out if you're interested, if you have some deprivation curiosity around that, the sky's blue because the blue wavelength is shorter, and so there's just the probability of those molecules, or that wavelength, getting through the atmosphere more than red. And so that's why the sky is blue rather than red. But we could say, oh, I need to know why the sky is blue, or just be generally interested, like, oh, that's interesting, as we explore the topic and then try to remember what we learned in high school physics and all this stuff. So there's destination, there's journey, but the two actually feel very different. But I'll just pause there.
Yeah, I would agree. So this is exactly why I went on a whole food plant-based journey as a physician because I had a patient who got better very quickly. And her daughter quit ADD meds in 30 days. And I was very curious, like, why was she able
Mm.
to do that? And then I started doing the research. Well, then it just kept going. Then it moved into behavior change and habit formation. Why are some people successful and others aren't? Why can some people keep this on track and others not? So now I'm always looking for those tools. And then, of course, when I found your research and all the things you do, I was like a big fan from the beginning. So that is honestly, I totally see that difference. But when, like you also mentioned in your article, like driving down the highway, like how much longer? It's like the little kids in the back going, when are we there yet? Are we there yet? So,
Yeah.
That would be the deprivation. I'm assuming that would be more inclined or, or finding something in the grocery store you're looking for. It's like, I know it was here somewhere. Where is it? I
Right.
couldn't find my Ticino tea the other day. It's like, where is it? But yeah, I think so for sure. But so there is a definite difference in the feelings. So can you describe that? Because I think this goes back to your original research too on all the things that you've talked about with reward-based learning and all that. So
It does. And so we can just start with how they feel, and then we can talk about how these fit with reward-based learning. So, deprivation curiosity, we all have it probably, pretty often. It feels like that itch that needs to be scratched. It's like the kids in the back of the car saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And kicking the back of the seat,
Oh, yes.
So that fits with reward-based learning actually beautifully. So let's say there's the process is trigger, behavior, reward. And so the trigger is, I see something that I want to know the answer to. The behavior is to go look it up, on Google or whatever. And then that reward is having that itch scratched. We're like, I know the answer to that now. Even if, these can be the most random things where it can be like, why do grasshoppers sound the way that they sound? It's like, it's probably not going to change how I live my life if I go look that up. But for some reason at that moment, I have to, I'm just making that one up because I don't really care that much about why they sound the way they sound, but it is kind of interesting.
Right. Now I'm curious.
Right. So if I look that up, it's not going to, it's probably not going to help my patients more or whatever. But there's that itch, it's been scratched. So that scratching of the itch is the reward that comes from looking it up. And so then my brain gets, locked into doing that more and more and more. So even random things, I'm sure you've seen this, somebody's in the middle of a conversation with somebody else and they're talking about something and they're like, there's some little tidbit of information that would tend generally just get, it's like, oh yeah, we don't know that. And they keep going with the conversation. Suddenly everybody's in a race to Google it the fastest so they can know that little tidbit of information that's not going to help their conversation, but actually pulls them away from the conversation, but then is just satisfying that itch because it needs to be scratched. So there's deprivation, fits with reward-based learning in terms of negative reinforcement, right? Something's unpleasant. I need to know the answer. And we make that unpleasant thing go away by looking up the answer, and it reinforces the process for us to do it over and over and over to the point where these become weapons of mass distraction, right? Whether we're in a conversation, driving down the highway, in a meeting, whatever.
Right.
So there's deprivation curiosity. Interest curiosity also fits with reward-based learning, but has a different feel to it. So instead of that itch that needs to be scratched that feels kind of contracted with deprivation curiosity, it feels more open and free because we're like, we don't even know what answer we're looking for. We're just exploring something. That's why it's the journey. So it's positively reinforcing because it doesn't feel like I have to get this now. It doesn't feel itchy. It doesn't feel restless. It doesn't feel driven. It feels more exploratory, like, why is the sky blue? Or, one thing that I learned a few months ago was that there are certain animals that keep growing in size until they die. And I was like, why is that? And I write about that a little bit in this article.
Yeah.
Why is that the case? I didn't have to know the answer. I didn't know if there was an answer or how many answers there were, but it was just a really interesting thing. I was like, I didn't know that, and so it feels open, exploratory. I turn toward it. And the journey itself is the reward. So I don't have to get somewhere. I don't have to scratch that itch. It's just the journey itself that's rewarding, which actually is nice because it feels better than deprivation curiosity. And two, it's a way we can train ourselves to really tap into that interest curiosity, because it can help us, like I talked about in the article. It's a superpower that can help us work with all sorts of things. And maybe I'll give a concrete example of that. So we use curiosity as one of the core mindfulness practices in our app-based mindfulness training programs, whether it's for smoking, whether it's for stress or emotional or overeating with our Eat Right Now program, or with anxiety with our Unwinding Anxiety program. And with the Unwinding Anxiety app, it's somebody who was reporting in her journal that I think it was like panic disorder or something like that. She was just really, really panicked. And what we do is we help people start to map out their habit loops around, these old habits, right? And she was seeing that the panic doesn't feel very good. And then we help them replace that old behavior with the new behavior of curiosity itself. And she wrote, something about, I noticed the feelings of panic coming on. And then suddenly I just got curious and I went, what does that feel like? And so the curiosity kicked in as her new habit, and it felt so much better to be curious. She described it as it took all the wind right out of its sails. I wasn't just saying it was curious, it really was. And so it deflated that fear of panic itself, which can kind of build on itself to build panic, and just brought in her inherent, superpower of curiosity. And she was able to, work with it, and it became her new habit, which is pretty amazing.
So when you mentioned tapping into the superpower, you had an example as well with your colleague that you guys were in Colorado recently. Can you explain what that is exactly?
Yes, I was teaching what I believe to be the first ever week-long silent meditation retreat for an Olympic team. So this is the women's Olympic water polo team, and their coach and one of the psychologists at the U.S. Olympic Committee wanted them to go on a retreat to prepare for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. And so this is something that these women had never been on a silent retreat before. I don't know if any of them had even gone a day without speaking. And so, and this is a team, they're very connected. So we had them start learning mindfulness tools during this retreat, and mapping out their minds and starting to work with their own habit loops. And about 3 or 4 days in, we were on this hike where, in Colorado, this beautiful place, and we go on these mindful hikes in the afternoons to teach, to help them practice their skills while they're in motion, which is critical if you're, learning mindfulness to work, to use in the Olympics, for example. Yeah. We got to the top of this ridge up to this point where they could look over the valley. And my co-leader, her name is Dr. Robin Baudet, she and I decided that was the time to teach them our superpower mantra. So we'd been emphasizing the attitude of curiosity all along. And we can see how, when we get caught up in self-judgment or shame or worry or regret, we can start to map these habits out, but often we don't know how to work with them. So for example, this is worry was a very real, it was very tangible for these folks. There were only 11 spots on the Olympic team, and there were 16 of these athletes on this retreat. And so 5 of them knew that they were not going to make the team, and they didn't know when they were going to get cut. And we still don't, this is how the trials go for this team.
Wow.
So they, a lot of worry, a lot of fear, especially for some of the athletes. And so we were working with them, helping them work with these types of things so that they could learn to work with habit loops, which is going to serve them the rest of their lives, whether they make the team, whether they get an Olympic gold medal or not. But it's it's not that easy to just notice worry and let it go. And so curiosity, we were emphasizing curiosity is like, oh, get curious about what worry feels like, just like the patient or the person in our unwinding anxiety program that I mentioned. But we hadn't brought out the superpower yet. And we thought that this was a great time to do it. So on the count of 3, we were up on this ridge. We're all looking over this valley. It was quiet because they were all in silence. And we looked at each other and 1, 2, 3, and we went, and the athletes looked at us like we were crazy, which, justifiably. And then we did it again. And we said, and then they start smirking and they start, laughing. And, we had them do it with us. Okay, let's do this together. What does this feel like? Well, what's it like when we actually drop into our embodied experience? Is a very non-cognitive, like a non-thinking way to elicit that interest, curiosity. So for anybody that's got, that wants to be curious about anything, like if somebody's anxious, they can go, what does anxiety feel like in my body? And we can even have them ask simple questions like, is it more on the right side or the left side of my body? Is it on the right side? Is it on the left side? It doesn't matter what side it's on, but it can help us tap into this inherent superpower. We're like, oh, what does curiosity feel like? I'm sorry, what does anxiety feel like? But that slip was, oh, it's actually curiosity that we're feeling in that moment. And so we're shifting from being caught up in anxiety to kind of putting out that fire with curiosity itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, because I had one of the reasons when I first reached out to you last year sometime was I had a patient who I had found the anxiety, the app that you had, and I had also spoken to them about medications, but a young man chose to actually use the app, and 30 days later, he actually said, I don't need medication. This app was working great. And it was so powerful to actually see, because we had done the GAD-7, which is, for those who don't know, it's just an objective measurement of, feelings that they're having throughout a period of 2 weeks. And it had dropped dramatically. And I think I texted you those results and stuff, but yes. It was really phenomenal to see that power helping someone do that, and that curiosity and breaking literally anxiety as a habit. I never would have thought of anxiety as a habit. And how did you, now I'm getting off topic, but I am curious. So
what's that feel like?
So how did you decide that anxiety was actually a habit loop? Because just for those who are tuning into this and now they're curious, because there's so much anxiety in today's world.
There is. I think it's in our society, it's at higher levels than ever, at least recorded before. So we had found with our Eat Right Now program, so we had developed this, eating app to help people learn mindfulness, and we were getting pretty good results with it. We published a study where we had gotten, I think, 40% reduction in craving related eating. So we started asking people, what, how are you doing this? We had targeted specific mechanisms around eating. We get stressed, we eat, and we feel better. And so the stress eating habit loops were pretty well described. And so we could target those with this training. And we were finding that mechanistically it was doing that. But we were also noticing that one of the big triggers for people to eat was anxiety. And they started saying, hey, can you develop an anxiety program? And so I said, I don't know. I'm a psychiatrist, so I'd worked a lot with people with anxiety, but I hadn't thought about it until then as a potential habit loop. And it turns out that there are decades of literature on this topic showing that anxiety can be reinforced through negative reinforcement. So we feel like there's a negative emotion like fear. That's the trigger. And then we start to worry. That's the behavior. And then the result is that we start to feel more in control or even avoid that negative emotion, even though worry is not a great emotion unto itself. So it can get reinforced. But the problem is that worry itself, as I mentioned, doesn't feel good. And we're not actually that much in control. So as our brains figure this out, the worry starts to spiral into itself. And so anxiety creates worry, and worry creates more anxiety. And then the two just, take us down into this black hole or this spiral of anxiety. So it turns out that anxiety can be negatively reinforced just like any other habit, which I hadn't known, but was curious about as these folks were describing their experiences. And that was what led us to feeling pretty confident that we could develop a program.
And so that is really, I mean, it's really cool. And then when we start doing our conferences now too, because we're, when I speak to patients and do different things speaking, I pull out your paper and then share it stuff with people and say, listen, if I combine what you're teaching with a whole food plant-based diet, I really feel like it's a dynamite pairing. And it seems to work really, really well. And so it makes me more curious. This is getting bad. I'm just using this bad frequency into the ground. But the thing here too is when you look at, like, for example, my daughter went to Spain this year with a group of friends, and being a controlling, worried mother, I was like, there's a little Find Me app on my phone. And so whenever I wake up and I was worried about where she was, I would find out where she was. And it was like this deprivation curiosity, but then I almost think it made it worse. Like you said, this negative reinforcement, because I had a tool to ease it. And then I was like, I need more of it. And I kind of became a tad bit anxious about her being over there. And I was so relieved when she was on a plane coming back home. And not that she was ever in danger or anything.
Right.
I mean, with a group of friends, safe. She's a good kid, young adult, I should say. And, but that I can see where that happens, and very quickly. But the curiosity works well too in the middle of a panic. So I went scuba diving with my family a couple years ago in December off the Keys in Florida, and it was rough waters. And not scuba diving, we went snorkeling, excuse me. And I had been swimming plenty of times, lots of snorkeling, but I had not been in rough waters like that in some time, or if ever, actually, that far out in the ocean. And I actually started to feel a bit panicked, and I was like, it's like, why am I feeling panicked? I look under the water, it's calm, it's okay, there's people around me. And it really was that I had to pull in the curiosity of why I was feeling panicked in that moment. And it worked great. And I went on and had a great rest of the day, but it took me about 10 minutes to calm down. But it was really a really concrete example of what you're describing, is that curiosity helping you pull out of a panic moment.
Yes, I think that's a great example of it. And I saw just 2 days ago in my clinic, I saw a patient that I'd been seeing for about 5 months who had severe panic, for example, severe panic disorder, where he had this consistent fear of getting in a wreck on the highway in his car. And he was basically homebound. When he came to see me, he walked in the door, he was visibly shaken, because he had made it to my office, even though it was only a couple of miles from his house, but just not, he was that severely caught up in his panic. Well, fast forward 4 months, I was walking out of class. I teach at Brown University. I was walking out of class in Providence, and the School of Public Health is on this main road. And lo and behold, this guy drives by me, rolls down his window and waves, "Hey, Dr. Jud." He's an Uber driver now.
What? He's an Uber driver. So how did you even approach that? Because I think that is so relevant to so many people. Like, how do you even begin that conversation with someone and teaching them this?
Yeah, with him, we started by just mapping out his habit loop. So within, the first couple of minutes of him coming in for the first visit, he was giving me his history, and I was trying to get a sense for what was going on. And so we were able to map out several habit loops. So one was around the driving. You have a thought that you're going to get in a wreck. That's the trigger. The behavior is that you don't drive. And then the reward is you can avoid that. So avoidance was a big thing for him. And so, and actually I drew it out on a piece of paper for him, which actually connected us really nicely, because he said, okay, you know, you're listening, you get, and I felt good because I understood what he was talking about. And then he went on to map several more. So he described where he had gone to a restaurant with his girlfriend to eat, I think it was sushi or something. He had this thought, oh, maybe I'm allergic to fish. He's not allergic to fish. His rational mind said, you're not allergic to fish. But he got so panicked that they had to leave, and they had to leave their date at that restaurant because he was so freaked out. So that was his baseline. The other thing I'll mention is he was hypertensive. He was about 180 pounds overweight. And he later told me he had a fatty liver from not eating well. So he came back. So I gave him our Unwinding Anxiety app, and I said, okay, map out your habit loops. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Let's go from there. He comes back 2 weeks later, and he walks in the door, big smile on his face. I said, what? And he said, oh, I lost 14 pounds. And I said, I thought we were working on anxiety. And he said, no, I realized that I eat because of my anxiety as a way to relieve my anxiety, and it doesn't really help. So he got firsthand experience with seeing the non-reward that comes from eating, and also the negative reward, because he didn't feel good about his weight, and he knew that it was affecting his health, his blood pressure, his liver, and all these things.
Wow.
So, he said it was pretty easy just to cut out that stress eating, because I really wasn't seeing a benefit from it. But once I mapped that piece out, I could just let go of it. So, fast forward, I went to when I saw him a couple of days ago. He's now lost 80 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
His hypertension is gone. He's normotensive, and his fatty liver is resolved. So all of that from, just mapping out those eating habit loops. But with his anxiety over the course of the next couple of months when I was working with him, as he could map these out, he could start to bring in his mindfulness practices that he was learning with the Unwinding Anxiety app, and see, oh, I can actually, can I get curious? What does this feel like when I have, this fear? Can I notice that these are just thoughts that are coming up in my head? Like, oh, are you allergic to fish? And I can just notice that as a thought, as compared to maybe I am allergic to fish suddenly, magically, when I haven't been for 40 years,
Right.
And he was able to map those out, realize that, that these are just thoughts and emotions and sensations in his body, and bring in his curiosity superpower to say, oh, is this real? Is this not real? What's this feel like? Does this come and go? And, as I mentioned, became an Uber driver.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
So this makes me think of a few different things, but first of all, labels in the sense. So people say, oh, I have anxiety. I'm an anxious person, right? So they have now seen themselves, or they've labeled themselves as anxious, or as a diabetic, or hypertensive, or someone who's just overweight because, my grandparents were, and my parents were diabetic, or whatever.
Right.
And so I'm curious what you think of. It is not going to stop. So labels as almost a negative reinforcement in a sense too, because then you're going to be able to avoid, dealing with it. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because when I have people curious about the idea of actually eating better and reversing some of these chronic diseases, or at least making them significantly better, that is really powerful for people when you tap into that. And I make them curious about a different future without the chronic disease and without the label, because they've always been said, oh, you're a diabetic, you'll be one forever.
Right.
And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, the labels can be really detrimental, and I think you're bringing this up. So I haven't thought about this much, but just what immediately comes to mind is a label is a concept that is not specific. So what does I'm a diabetic mean? It's a concept,
Right.
But if you break it down to its component elements, it means, my pancreas isn't working as well as it needs to, or my cells aren't working as well at, my insulin receptors or whatever. There's something that's affecting my body's ability to process sugar and do all this stuff. So I'm a diabetic, and it could mean, oh, I have to eat certain types of foods, or avoid certain types of foods, or whatever, or exercise, or lose weight, or, all these things. Right. If we break it down to the component elements, we can actually get very concrete and say, okay, well, what does this actually how does this manifest in the moment? And we can work with each of those elements so that it's not like some overarching thing that just seems insurmountable. It can just be, okay, well, it's this, it's this, it's this. And that's actually, it's interesting you bring that up, but that's exactly how we help people work with emotions, where somebody says, I'm anxious. When I say, okay, what does that feel like in your body? Because I'm anxious just feels too big, and it doesn't have handholds. They don't have a place to be able to grab it, or to start to climb out of, it's like this big pit, and it's, the walls are smooth and they can't climb out. Well, if you say, okay, well, what is anxiety? Well, it's thoughts. Suddenly there's a handhold of a thought, or you can start to climb. It's sensations in my body. Well, what do those sensations feel like? Oh, it's tightness, it's tension, it's burning, my shoulders are tense. There's another handhold, because they can work with all those things and start to see, oh, a thought comes and goes. These sensations come and go. And we can actually bring curiosity to those specific elements and work with each of those elements using curiosity, as compared to I'm anxious. Where do you bring, you can't bring curiosity to that because it's too much of a concept.
Right. And I think makes a lot of sense for patients who've been labeled as let's take diabetes, for example.
Yeah.
So I work with a lot of diabetics. And so when I have someone who says, oh, I have type 2 diabetes, refill medications or something, I was like, well, of course I consider that an invitation to discuss diabetes. So I do. And so I was like, so tell me, did anyone ever explain to you what actually causes diabetes, like why you're a diabetic on a cellular level? And I think that question, why, because I was listening to you, just as we converse today, I think the what versus the why, right? So it's, why are you a diabetic, not what are you, you're a diabetic. And I think that helps bring that moment in. I was like, maybe I should start with, maybe did anyone explain to you why you're diabetic? But I go into the elements like you're describing and give them the handhold of this is what's happening. And this is why you can get better by changing certain foods and, doing certain behaviors that will help. And it really gives them, I think it empowers them, and they feel so much calmer, right? Because I think there's a lot of anxiety just with chronic disease. People feel hopeless and helpless, and they feel like as a victim to the circumstances of this disease process.
Right. And it moves from this black box of like diabetes or anxiety or whatever into, well, it's this, this, and this, and I can work with this, this, and this. The other piece that it also opens up is the exploration around, so let's say whole food plant-based diet. Oh, what's it like when I eat, junk food as my calories versus eating a whole food plant-based diet? Out of full disclosure, I'm a big fan of plant-based diet, as I'm sure people can hear just from the tone of my voice.
I wonder if he's plant-based.
Yeah. But for me, it's eating junk food. Back in junior high school, I used to race BMX bikes, and I started exploring. My mom suggested, well, why don't you explore, eating junk food versus eating like peanut butter and honey sandwiches, because I would have to race multiple heats in a day and I would run out of energy. And so I started exploring that. What's this like? And it was so much better. I had so much more sustained energy. I just felt better, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of moved me in the direction of really exploring this. And I can't imagine now going back and eating a bunch of meat or eating a bunch of dairy. It just feels so good. And so I'm sure you see this a lot, where you have people just explore what are the results, right? They can use that same reward-based learning system. What are those results when you eat healthy food versus junk food, when you eat minimally processed food versus, a totally processed food with a shelf life of 20,000 years?
The Twinkies. Yeah, exactly. And I use that as an example of how to build healthy habits, right? So we're moving them away from eating the standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet. And I say, what's going to happen is this is going to reinforce the habit of eating healthy because you feel so good.
Yeah.
It's very, very powerful when you feel well, because I'll be 49 in a few days, and I'll tell you, I don't feel 49. I feel like I'm 29. And, I can't even fathom eating or living any different way, because that's just, it's just not gonna, why would I do that?
Right. So the reward-based
Yeah.
learning piece.
And it's fun too, because my husband lost 70 pounds. He finished his first full Ironman this summer, and he'll be 50 in April. So he's no young chicken either. So, again, he's excited to share that message with other people. And like, why would we do anything different? And so, it is, and it feeds into it, and you feel excited and you share it with other people. I had a patient, oh, bless him, in Colorado before I moved away and came back. And he was like, he had all sorts of issues, overweight, high blood pressure, pain. And I was like, let's just talk about plant-based. He goes, listen, Dr. Marvis, you're a vet, so I'm going to be respectful and listen to you, but I'm not going to go plant-based. I said, well, just give me a minute. So I pull out the vet card. I'll use anything to make someone listen. And he listened. What a sweetheart. And he decided, okay, I'll do it for 30 days, but then I don't want you bugging me again. I'm like, okay. And so of course what happens is he loses all this weight, feels so much better. He becomes the biggest evangelist for a plant-based diet. He goes, every time I see him, he goes, I don't understand why my sister won't do this. Nobody's listening. I don't understand why they do. I was like, well, ask yourself why you wouldn't listen to begin with. You were very set that you weren't going to do this. And he goes, he said that, And I think that's helpful too, when we look at how do we pique someone else's interest, is like, how can I get my kids to eat better? How can I get my spouse to, venture into eating plant-based with me? I think that's a great tool for relationships.
It is. And that actually brings us to one other piece of curiosity that I found fascinating as I was learning about this, is that when there's this inverted U-shaped curve around curiosity, where on the y-axis, the peak is higher curiosity. And on the x-axis, the two ends of it where there's minimal curiosity is when we know nothing and when we think we know everything. So when we know nothing, we're not that curious. For example, it's like, oh, hey, Jud, why don't you solve Fermat's last theorem? And I'm like, no, thanks. I'm not even a big fan of math. I don't even know what I don't even know what the plural of theorem is. So it's like, I'm zero on that. I'll leave that to the mathematicians. But let's use I'm just hypothetically speaking about your patient, who maybe he thought he knew everything about why he would never go plant-based. And so he was just not interested because, he's quote unquote the expert. He's like, I'm just not going there. I've heard about this. It's just a bunch of wackos that go plant-based, whatever. I'm not interested. So both ends of the spectrum, when we know nothing about a topic, like I have no idea why I would ever go plant-based, or I know every reason why I would never go plant-based, just using that as an example. Yeah. So if we can move people up on the curve just a little bit in either of those, on either of those ends, whether it's knowing nothing or knowing everything, that naturally piques our curiosity. So if somebody's not interested at all or doesn't know anything about it, and you say, going plant-based can actually help your diabetes. Oh, really? If they're diabetic. Tell me more. And so now they want to learn more. Or if somebody thinks they know everything and, they say, well, I'm never going to be able to get enough protein going plant-based, just as an example. You say, well, actually, that's a myth. Did you know the ancient gladiators were actually plant-based? Really? I just learned recently. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. Do you watch the Game Changers?
Yes. I did. It was a great movie. So just using that as an example, both of those can move us in the direction of curiosity and piquing that curiosity. So then naturally we want to learn more, and then you just let the ball roll from there. It's already in motion.
Interesting. So that is a really cool tool for any like health coaches or anybody. I mean, even if you're a mom who's trying to get their kids to eat better, thinking something to be curious, because there was also something in your article about, hold on, I wrote it down. Priming with trivia. So you have a little bit of trivia, and that primes them to learn even more. So in our example of plant-based eating, or even getting kids to eat better or something to that degree, anyone eating better, can you think of any examples, or maybe you can give an example of what that means exactly, or the study that you referenced?
Yeah. So these were folks just using trivia questions to pique people's curiosity, and they found that it actually helped their learning process. They would lay down memory and remember these random pictures of people's faces. So that was an aside experiment where they were checking to see if it improved their memory. But to give a concrete example, it could be, I'll just use an example from nutrition because it's in my brain now. So a trivia question could be around, let's say, vitamin B12. Well, if you're a vegetarian, you have to take B12 supplements. So there's a reason not to be vegetarian. Well, a trivia, if this is true, I think it's true, but I'm not the expert here, so people should fact check this. That B12 comes from bacteria in the dirt. And so we used to get this naturally when we drank water from streams or when we ate food that wasn't scrubbed, clean of every pathogen, in the world. And in fact, they give animals that we eat
B12 injections.
Yeah, they have to give them B12 injections because they get antibiotics, and so they kill the bacteria that get them the B12 that we would get our B12 from them. So the trivia question could be, well, it's actually it's not some inherent flaw in being vegetarian that we don't get B12. It's that this is how we get B12. Here's the trivia question: is it comes from bacteria in the dirt? Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And then we can oh, that's interesting. Maybe it's not that we are inherently paleo diet people. Mm-hmm. So long answer to your short question, but there's an example of a curiosity question.
Yeah, no, I wrote B12 clinical guidelines for where I work right now. So I've dove deep into the B12. They're like, oh, you're vegan. Why don't you do the B12? And I'm like, yeah, I'm on it. But yeah, so what happens is the B12 in the gut of animals is absorbed in the muscle. So when you eat animal, that's when you get that. But animals now in industrial agriculture are confined in spaces that you're not outside eating the grass and pulling up the dirt and eating the bacteria as well. And they're getting loads of antibiotics. And so, yeah, there's many reasons that most of actually my B12 deficient patients were people who ate meat. There's a lot of issues with inflammation in the gut and absorption. So I could talk about that forever. Probably write an article about that actually. But yeah, absolutely. But so if there's any one last little bit, because I know we're running short on time here. Can you give me an idea or give us a last bit of advice on the super hard curiosity, and what would you say would be the one takeaway from our conversation today that you would really like to highlight?
Yeah, I think the take-home message is that we all have this inherent superpower. So it's not like we have to go out and get it or learn something new. The second piece is that it fits beautifully with understanding how our minds work. So if we can see when we're stuck in some habit loop around, oh, I think I know nothing, or I think I know everything about something, we can bring in curiosity there. What does this feel like? And we can start to notice the difference between deprivation and interest curiosity. And even if we're in deprivation curiosity mode and really, racking our brain, like I have to know the answer to something, we can bring in that superpower of, what does this feel like? And we can actually bring interest curiosity right into the deprivation curiosity piece, so that we can, even if there's a destination that we're trying to get to, we can always be enjoying the ride. And that's really the one take home is, curiosity really helps us enjoy the ride through life, no matter what's coming at us, whether it's anxiety or overeating or, trying to decide whether we want to eat a plant-based diet or whatever, it really helps the ride be much more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Because you're going to get your answers. It just makes it easier to consume. I mean, yeah. I think that's amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Jud Brewer. We appreciate your time as always.
Thank you. This is fun.
It is a lot of fun. And I hope everyone listening enjoys this, and check out drjud.com. I'll put the link in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.